Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I am Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, neurospicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things symbolism, cycles, and patterns.
And I am Moonkittee, a queer femme poly kitchen witch and a proud geek. Today's topic is scratching the surface with shadow work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Shadow work, that ever
Yes,
elusive topic that we're constantly bringing up but never talking about.
exactly. We
I
had
mean,
mentioned this.
always
I don't
talking about.
always talking about, but never talking about, right? We've mentioned it so many times as something we need to do, and that whole fallacy of the idea of, oh, live in the light, live in the light. Well, if you're not addressing your shadow, you're not able to live in the light, and you get a little bit delusional if all you're doing is seeing the light. So,
And you know, as optimistic as I try to be, like
right.
so often, I really am not all in for toxic positivity. So
Exactly. Same thing. I am also an optimist, believe it or not. But yeah, there's a difference between optimism and toxic positivity. So,
agreed. Yeah.
so,
And I believe that we can be optimistic because we're willing to face the shadow.
mhm. And trust and faith and all of that other stuff that comes with it.
So,
But facing the shadows, knowing that there's a dark side and addressing it and making sure that we see what's coming up next.
right.
So how do we even start to scratch the idea of the surface of shadow work? So what do we mean when we say the shadow?
Um, I wanted to just preface this with why do we say scratch the surface? It's because we're trying not to have a 2 hour long conversation about
Yes.
this. And I have a feeling we'll probably revisit this at some point.
Right, right. Now this is the topic again. Like you said, we can talk on easily. This is a topic
Okay.
that could be an all-day session, an all-day seminar or workshop. We're trying to condense it into 45 minutes. So,
Let's talk
scratching the
about what the
surface.
shadow, yeah, we'll talk about what the shadow is, and then we'll talk about what shadow work is not. Because
Hmm.
the shadow of shadow work is what it's not, right? I
Sure.
don't know. That was you're like, I'm not Simona, your logic is we're good. Okay.
We're good.
So the shadow is
Hmm.
it's a personal thing. It's
Hmm.
is connected to like the ego. Carl Jung would address it as there's the consciousness and the stuff that we aren't conscious of.
Hmm.
What's our subconsciousness or unconsciousness. So it could be things that we're not aware of. But the shadow can also be things that we are aware of, but we don't like it. So we kind of hide that about ourselves.
Hmm.
So the shadow are things that maybe we were taught to feel ashamed of, um, that somebody had a strong opinion about something, and so we kind of unconsciously develops, some unconscious biases.
Hmm.
Unpacking those could be like shadow work. So the shadow is the things that kind of sit in the shadow that you don't like really give a lot of energy or attention to, or you even would hide away out of shame or guilt or whatever. And it can disempower us because we're not living authentically if we're not aware of our unconscious biases and our shadow aspects.
Hmm.
And we're not fully integrating all of who we are, no matter how we were taught to feel about that. Because there's a lot of things that I will say I was taught to not embrace about myself that in the process of doing shadow work, I've learned to be very proud of
Hmm.
my sense of like being very sensitive person. You
Hmm.
shouldn't be so sensitive. Oh, the world's gonna eat you up. You're so sensitive. Don't be so sensitive. Lots of messages around that growing up.
Hmm.
And in fact, I really feel like my sensitivity is my strength. It's not going away. It's just part of who I am. So we're not going to fix it,
Hmm.
but we're going to love it into integration, into accepting that that's who I am.
Exactly. And I same thing with for me, the idea of shadow work is those aspects of ourself that can seem undesirable, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And it's the parts we don't like to face. And that part we don't like to face, that can be identified, like you said, by someone else, those things that are projected onto us. For me, I was too much. I was too curious, or I was too interested in this, and what I was interested in was weird. I was always too much. Or it could be our own perceptions that we're not enough. We're not good enough to do that thing we want to do. We're not good enough to perform. We're not good enough to be a parent. We're not good enough to take care of this or do that. So identify by someone else or identify by ourselves. And it deals with that internal idea of internal shame and biases. But also, there's those cultural shames and biases
Yeah.
too that we
Mhm.
want to deal with. And when we
Mhm.
talk about patterns of violence and social justice work and institutional structures, that cultural shame and biases, um, in the idea of like systemic racism and misogyny and all those things that you are XYZ,
Yeah.
therefore you are not good enough. And
Yeah.
taking that in and then projecting it out onto others. So there's a lot of white women who tend to don't not to buy into misogyny and misandry and all
Yeah.
those things because that is what they were taught is the best way and the
Mhm.
proper way, and keeping things, even though it goes against themselves,
Mhm.
it works to keep yourself oppressed. And that's a really interesting idea, of that idea of cultural shame, also dealing with that shadow work and how social justice work,
Yes.
for all that it has the this kind of like varied biased opinion around it. When you say the word, there's a lot of opinions, positive and negative, about what social justice work is. It's the idea of doing things to create balance on a social level. So that also is dealing with shadow work.
100%. There's also one that really, really gets to me that I would love to see our American culture
Hmm.
unpacking is the fact that on one hand we have these patriarchal, religious, hyper puritanical, anti you know, sex and
Hmm.
women owning their bodies beliefs. And then on the other hand, all of capitalism and so much like commercialism is driven off of like this concept that sex sells.
Hmm.
And those two things are true in our culture, and yet they seem to like that they fuel one another because it's almost like the shame and the like you could just imagine
The Madonna whore
there.
complex.
Yes, like how dare a woman be
Hmm.
empowered? She must be a whore or a witch or a
Hmm.
or and then here's the other thing when we come back to the queer community, how much we talk about like unpacking even the sexism and the biases within the queer community itself, all of us under this umbrella really working to learn and understand and embrace the trans and non-binary
Hmm.
experiences who 100% fall under our umbrella, and yet we still have pockets of turfs and swarfs and
Gatekeeping and bi erasure, pan erasure. If you happen to be in a heterosexual passing relationship, obviously you're not bi, which, as we know, is not a true statement. But it's
correct.
one of those things. It's the gatekeeping of those,
Yeah.
and how we deal with those aspects and biases.
So
So
in
I
order to address these sorts of things communally, we have to be willing to buy in to shadow work.
right,
And I think a lot of that starts with back again with ourselves
right.
and starting to understand what our unconscious biases are, why we had to come out, why we
Hmm.
had to like come out to ourselves before we came
Hmm.
out to anybody else. Some people don't
Exactly.
have to do that, but some people do.
Right. Changing the world starts with changing yourself. Um, in all of that. So dealing with your own shadow work, like you said, helps us deal with the cultural shadow work that we can then start to unpack on a better level. So
Yes.
that is what we think shadow work is. What isn't shadow work?
Good one. Yeah, because yeah. A lot of people think that it's like baneful magic. And baneful magic is baneful magic.
Right.
It's something you would do to affect the outcome of a situation or a connection with a person or a place or a thing. But shadow work is not that. It's not, you're not out there doing demonic possession and
Curses, hexes.
right. And hey, I am not bagging on that stuff either. There
Mm-mm.
is a time and a place, and every witch to her own, whatever your ethics are, not under my responsibility or my control.
Right. But that kind of thing, but that's not shadow work. That's what I'm
No,
saying is,
and
yeah.
shadow work can have a really wonky reputation. Like
Mhm.
somebody's like, "What is that, Satanism?" No, but Satanism's kind of like go look into that. They're
I
doing
know it's
cool
kind of
stuff
cool.
over there. But no, shadow work is very important part of honestly, if anybody's in therapy, you've probably engaged in some shadow work.
Hmm.
And if you haven't,
Go to therapy.
yeah. I that's what I wanted to say, but I also want to leave room for that isn't always economically,
Right. I said for
which is why we have a lot of things that we can do for ourselves, and as the, witches that we are, how
Mhm.
we can kind of tend to our own spirit and healing.
Exactly. I said therapy is great. It can help you engage with it,
Yeah.
unpack it, all that kind of stuff if you have the means. But again, acknowledging that not everyone has the means because, again, in these United States of America, mental health is not a priority in any way, shape, or form. Though if it was, we would all be a little bit better off. But that would also be empowering the populace, which goes against the entire nature of what we're doing. But that's a whole other topic that we're not going to get into. So
Because we're scratching this, we're
we're
just
scratching
scratching
the
the surface.
surface.
I will say that shadow work is a part of healing and self-care
Hmm.
that is kind of an honestly unnecessary thing for anybody who is on the witch path.
Hmm.
I cannot see how anybody would be able to avoid it
Right.
and be an authentic, in tune
Hmm.
witch, all around well-rounded.
And it's one of those things that, again, speaking personal antidote here, that when I was trying to repress and hide who I was and not being authentic, the magic wouldn't come.
Right.
So that acknowledging of the shadow because I was trying to hide and keep down and not acknowledging that aspect of me at that time I felt was shadow. It was a shadow aspect. Again, that's another example of embracing it, and it's no longer a shadow aspect for me. But that shadow aspect of being weird and different and
Yeah.
innately witchy, by repressing it and trying to push it down and hide it, I was not able to do it. So it's that coming to terms with those aspects of yourself. And sometimes, like you said, embracing and loving them. It's not
100%.
separate from us, it's part of us.
Yeah, and so that's part of what shadow work is. It
Hmm.
starts with being able to sit with yourself
Hmm.
and being honest with yourself, because, you don't gotta lie to yourself. You're the only one in your own head,
Hmm.
hopefully. Um
Again, not
uh,
denying there are people who have more than one voice in their head, and that's
I
a
know
different
that's,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
right. Yeah. But listen, just sitting with yourself, acknowledging these things, realizing that the shadow is not something that is separate from you.
Mm-mm.
Um, and if you are really detached from your shadow, you have it very repressed, can be completely unconscious about some things, but you will find that you navigate through the world really disliking certain people for certain reasons. Um, and this is not always, like, we have other reasons. Often we will end up really not liking in other people things that we don't like about ourselves,
Hmm.
but it's really hard for us to face it in ourselves, so we will project our feelings onto other people,
Hmm.
and that also can also warp our perceptions of people. So
Right.
that's again why it's so important to start like really unpacking some of these things, and like, why do I react like to this way to this person? Oh, this person over here is reminding me of my younger self who,
Was
can I
taught
just
to
say,
hate gay
she's an,
people
or
or
whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. My younger self had these things that I had to work through and learn better, and that person's over there doing these things that I just like hate that I did back then.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that would be acknowledging that that's a part of you. Your reaction to things can really shine a light on some of that
Mhm.
shadowy stuff.
Yes. And it's one of those things that makes you question your reaction to why am I doing this? And that's the hard, that's probably one of the first steps when we're talking about it, is why am I doing this? How is it making me feel? It's that idea. It's not separate. And it's the truth regardless of how you were taught to think about it. It's really interesting that shadow work is um, good or bad, doesn't have a connotation. It's just, it is a part of you
Yeah.
because it's based on what you were taught, how you were raised, what you believe, and your innate personality.
The good and the bad, that's
Mhm.
so subjective.
Yes.
You know, the other thing that came up for me during a tarot reading that I was actually doing last night is actually a couple of things that were very fascinating.
Hmm.
But the first one is that shadow work is also unpacking fears that we
Hmm.
have that
Hmm.
hold us back. And sometimes that can even be the ever elusive and annoying fear of our own success. And
Right.
therefore, we don't even try. Fear of failure, because you can't succeed unless you're willing to fail, right?
Hmm.
Because how else
Right.
are we supposed to learn? So, even being able to unpack our fears and reclaim the power that they once had over us, like the devil card would in
Hmm.
tarot, that's a big one that I think is important shadow work. And then the other thing that this friend of mine brought up is they're a therapist, and they were talking about in some ancient cultures there was this tradition of the sin eaters. These sin eaters would they were kind of like not of the community, like they were
Hmm.
pariahs or like, kind of like on the edge of the community, but they did this service for the community where they would come in and they would literally eat a meal off of at a funeral off of the casket, and to symbolize that they are taking in this person's sin so that when they go to their afterlife, they can go free of their,
Hmm. The burdens and
right. And then that person is like obviously a magical container that can take all of that and process it out and through. And so it kind of sets them on the edge of the community, kind of like therapists do, right?
hmm.
They're in container to hold space for everybody's ish, and then they have to go dump that ish because they can't, they have to be human too, they can't
Hmm.
hold on to all of
Can't
that.
hold on to it.
So just that concept of like being able to absolve people of their sins, that too is shadow work, and that's probably communal shadow work,
Hmm.
being able to confess our sins, not to bring the Catholicism back, but I often do feel like sometimes tarot readings are much like therapy and confessionals.
Hmm. Or even just the idea of in the queer community walking into, like I said, the gay bar the first for your first time, or a drag show, or even a pride event or something, where that first act of walking in there is its own kind of benediction and resolution, its own kind of
Yeah,
cleansing, where you are able to be in a community with other people and talk about the way you were feeling, might have been ostracized, or that acknowledgement and step into that kind of vibrancy of something else will help be that sin eater that takes away
yeah.
um that kind of shame and despair around the situation, around that circumstance. There's a lot of different things that we kind of get associated with shadow work, and how we deal with it, and the ways we can clean it out of ourselves.
Okay, well, so since we're only scratching the surface, we're already starting to get a
Hmm.
little deep.
Right.
If somebody were to come up to you and
Hmm.
say, I've never really thought about this before, but I want to start doing shadow work, what would you suggest to help them get started?
For me, it would be thinking about the parts of yourself that you think you don't like. So, what are the parts of yourself that you think you don't like because you were taught to be ashamed of them? And that goes
Mm-hmm.
back to, it's easier at first to externalize what others put onto you. Sometimes before it's easier to acknowledge what you put onto yourself. So starting with that first step is, what are the things that you think you don't like because you were taught to be ashamed of them? So for again, for me, it was, I always just, I love being out there. I love being in the spotlight. I love being a ham. I was called a ham so much. I liked being in front of people. And I was taught that was a bad thing. I was, again, singing songs and talent shows at 4 years old, kind of thing. I had no shame and I really enjoyed it. But by the time I was 5 or 6, and it was like, oh, wow, you're doing that. It shut me down. So I still had this drive to want to do it. But I started thinking about, oh, I must be too much. I'm not, people are telling me that I'm too much and all of this. I can't do those things because then I would be putting myself out there too much. Um, and so that's, again, think about that part that you're ashamed of and why and how it was put on you by other people, and try to think back to a time when it didn't bother you and when it started to. And then again, why, take that inventory? Why do I feel this way about myself?
Yeah.
Because shame's that learned behavior. You were taught for some reason to be ashamed of it by someone
Yes.
else. And again, that shame that they put on you was someone else's shadow work that they didn't unpack. So it's a cycle that can be really, really cyclical,
Yeah.
but also
Yeah.
generational.
Yes.
The idea of, okay, my mother was taught this, therefore she passed it on to me, therefore
Hmm.
it got passed on, and so on down the line until someone breaks that cycle, makes a conscious decision to break that cycle of shame and that learned behavior of it.
And the
um
way different generations approach child
mhm,
rearing was also a part of a conversation I had recently, which really kind of blew my mind. Just the idea of how attached humans now become with their fewer kids that they're having
mhm,
versus the older generations where they would have a gaggle of children. Not all of them would make it to
mhm,
adulthood. Sometimes, the chance of that was
mhm,
different than it is now. And they were objects. Children were objectified back then, where now we see them as people, little people.
mhm,
I hope we do.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so just the way things have changed generationally,
mhm,
there's so much generational trauma just because of the way that our society is developing.
mhm,
And the way things were done back then is not how we do them now.
mhm,
Yeah, there's a lot of generational trauma around that. Because what you were saying with like kind of suppressing your exuberance, your beautiful fire, your sad shininess. I think about how children were supposed to be seen and not heard,
mhm,
and how I was mocked for having a loud and joyful laugh slash guffaw.
mhm.
Guffaw was the word my mom used. I have a guffaw. And it was
I love that
they
word, but I know it's
mocked.
shameful in that sense. But the guffaw is a great word. Great word.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
Now.
my friends, if they take me to a comedy club and the comedian hits it on the right note, and I will guffaw, and everybody in the room knows it's me laughing. And I still will bring up really
Mhm,
weird embarrassment for me, but then I just have to like like in that moment we'll unpack that shadow of the embarrassment, like, oh well, who cares? Like I'm going to take up space, and I can be loud, and I can be big, and I can be
mhm.
happy, and I won't feel ashamed for my joy. And
Right.
that was so sad that like my inner child had to feel ashamed because I laughed loud. Sorry, I was happy.
Right.
Yay, shadow work.
It's really easy when we're talking about this to empathize with someone else's while still feeling ashamed to bring up your shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but also one thing my therapist recently said to me,
Hmm.
uh, you can't heal anything you're not addressing.
Right.
If you're not willing to talk about it, it can't be healed. So
Hmm.
we have to be able to have these unpacking conversations, even if it's just with ourselves or our journals, however
Hmm.
you may journal or reflect back. Because I know that the internet is full of shadow work journals, shadow work
Hmm.
journaling prompts, shadow work. So this is like what I would probably say to people if they want to like ask me how to get started. I would say tarot readings. You can do there's shadow work spreads.
Hmm.
You could even just find journaling prompts, get the prompt, pull one card, one prompt, and one journal page. And there you go. You've done your shadow work for the day slash week slash whatever
Hmm.
interval you feel like you can address this at. Shadow work is best to be doing at the dark slash new moon
Hmm.
era,
Or
and
any sort
or
of waning moon.
exactly. That was my next step. And also at Samhain and Yule and
Hmm.
all through the winter season. And even if it's not winter anytime, we're still going to have these dark shadow cycles with the moon,
Hmm.
even through the lighter months. So there's still time, like really good of times. And also, guess what? You don't have to line it up with the seasons and
No.
you could just do it. If it
Yeah.
feels right to do it now, just do it.
Hmm.
Isn't that what some commercial told us when we
I
were
know
kids?
some brand athletic, I believe.
Like, look, we're not going to mention them because they're not
Right.
paying
Yeah.
us.
Not a sponsor. Um,
We're
but
so
yeah, no, I
excited.
love that you mentioned like journal shadow work prompts. So we've talked
Yeah.
about this as ideas before where I know I am a lousy journaler, but I still love thinking about the prompts for it. And I did, and I'll link below in the show notes. I found a couple of pages where each page has 100+ journal prompts that deal with shadow work. So there's like, to get you started, we have
Great.
200 questions that will get you almost 3/4 of the way through a year if you did one every single day of shadow work prompts that you could deal with. But I wanted to kind of pull out and read off 5 of them that I thought were really fascinating to give you an idea of what you can do. So you don't have to go someplace else, but to give you an idea of what you can do for journal prompts or like you said, tarot card pulls that again deal with what's going on. And we've got some stuff talking about shadow work decks that we'll talk about in a little bit too. But for journal prompts, the first one I found was, do you struggle with showing your self-compassion, but you have no problem showing it to others?
Rude.
Right? Um, when you really think about it, is there anything you're currently in denial about and avoiding?
Yes, but I don't want to talk about it because I'm avoiding it.
Exactly. And I'm
Thanks.
in denial about it.
But yeah, I could definitely journal about that stuff.
Uh-huh. Have you ever found yourself manipulating others to protect yourself? I am
Mm.
fully guilty of this one, and I know it.
Yeah, that one's a rough one for me because I was so manipulated by my mother that I'm like super hyper vigilant. Like, I will be very strong in my opinions, and then I will make sure like I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you how I feel because I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life. But yeah, that person, yeah, I will be strong in my opinions about some things.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to try to manipulate people, but I have feelings and
Right.
thoughts.
What kinds of things about yourself make you feel less than others?
Yeah.
Right? What are those parts that you are taught to be ashamed of? And then
Mm.
last one, I find this one interesting. What's one lie you tell yourself consistently, and why do you tell it?
I am not in a position to talk about this right now. I'm just kidding. We're not
Again,
going to get into shadow work right now, are we?
right.
No, but those
But
are really good
are
prompts.
those great ideas and prompts for to help
Yeah.
you start with the idea of shadow work? If you
Because you're
don't know
just
where to
talking about them in my
go,
brain.
if you
Yep.
don't know where to go, don't know how to do, just you're just going to scratch that surface, as we say. Um, those questions. Think about those
Yeah.
questions. And again, we will
Good.
link 200 other ones that you could also ask yourself. Some of them aren't quite as deep,
Yeah.
but it kind of all these kinds of things that can help you wherever you are at in your
Yeah.
own journey, because everyone's in a different place. Wherever you are at in your own journey, whether you are new to shadow
Find.
work, you've never even done the concept, or you are an expert, you've dived in and you deal with your shadow every dark moon. There's something there for everyone in how you see it and how you kind of work on it. So I think that's a really great way to start thinking about it. And again, journaling is great if you are willing to write it down. If you're even just thinking about it, just spend 10 minutes thinking about the prompt and what it means. Is also doing the work. It's just not physically writing the work down.
Yes. And find what resonates for you, what
Hmm.
works for you. It's all about accommodating yourself, right? We've talked about this before. I wanted to share just like a meme that
Hmm.
I saw
Yes,
that I was
please.
like, I had to send it to you because I'm like, oh, this is what this we're gonna talk about shadow work. I'm so excited. But
Yes.
this is it was just like this beautiful poem that goes, you should dance with the skeletons in your closet. Learn their names so you can ask them to leave. Have coffee with your demons and ask them important questions like, what keeps you here? Learn that what doors they keep finding open and kick them out.
Hmm.
I thought
I
that was
like
very
it.
powerful. Yeah.
Exactly. Love it. Acknowledge. Find where you're at, acknowledge it,
Yeah.
and you can work through it.
Yeah. So, you mentioned decks that you would use
Yes,
for
I did.
shadow work.
And I have one deck of these I pulled up, and there's again, you can do a quick search anywhere and look for shadow work decks, and you can find a bunch of them. I know I have backed several that are becoming from Kickstarter because once again, I am a Kickstarter tarot deck whore, which I fully acknowledge, and there is no shadow behind that or shame.
No shame.
The one of the first decks, and the deck that I have, and I'll hold it up because it kind of came in a cool little tin. And it's like hard to see the reflection here. It's the Dark Reflections Tarot by Lamuzzi Designs. And what I really like about this one is the fact that it has all the regular tarot entries. But for example, like the Six of Wands, it talks about this card represents challenge, perseverance, and standing up for oneself, often indicating a need to defend one's position and assert authority. Sorry, the Seven of Wands, not the Six of Wands, the Seven of Wands. Now, shadow traits to explore is hopeless versus hopeful.
Mm.
So it gives you an idea of what are the two aspects of this and how does it relate to shadow work in here. So the idea of the Seven of Wands, when you are dealing with a shadow, when you are repressed, it's giving up, it's admitting defeat, it's yielding, lack of self-belief, surrender, feeling overwhelmed, disadvantaged, or anxiety. But your growth opportunities, once you accept that aspect of yourself, talks about having an advantage, taking a stand, staying on top, holding your ground, becoming courageous, confident, and
Mm.
determined. And then it gives you some questions to ask. Do you feel overwhelmed? Are you determined to win at all costs? Are you trusting in the process? So it gives you a lot of these, again, kind of prompts and stuff that come up with the idea of the cards. So you would spread a card thing out, and then it gives you the deck and the shadow work aspect
Yeah.
and the questions to deal with to help you dig a little bit deeper into that portion of it. So that's
I love that.
isn't it great? So I have not
Yes.
played with it much yet. It's on my list of doing, but yeah, no, it's a fantastic thing. And I found three other decks. Again, I don't know much about, but they're all from independent artists. And I thought that deal with shadow, and I just got some really good energetic vibes
Mhm.
from them. The first one is called the Shadow Work Deck. It's as simple as that. It's by Mary Siasinski, her website, or shadowworkdeck.com. It's simple, it's easy, it's right there.
Nice.
Then there's the Moonchild Tarot Shadowwork Edition. So this is
Ooh.
one that there's the Moonchild Tarot that has a regular version and then a shadow aspect version of it. So there's two aspects to the deck. And I've come across several decks that are like that have a dark and a light
Oh,
um,
I love
aspect
I
to them.
would as a tarot reader, I would have a lot of fun with that
Hmm. Exactly,
because I
because
would I would create custom spreads that did both
uh-huh.
and you would use both. Yeah, very cool.
Exactly. So that one's by Danielle Noel, and you can find it at daniellenoel.art. And
I
again,
love that
all these
name.
links will be in the show notes.
Danielle Noel. That's
Danielle
just fun to
Noel,
say. That's
right?
fun to say.
Uh-huh.
That's got my echolalia going. Danielle Noel.
Danielle
Ah!
Noel.
Okay.
Lovely name. And the last one is it's actually a two-parter. There's an oracle and a shadow work deck
Oh,
which tie together. So it's the Obsidian Veil Oracle and the Shadowwork Tarot decks, and it's by
oh.
Ethereal. So again, same thing. It's if you are more of an Oracle deck person versus a tarot deck
Hmm.
person, here's an Oracle option for you that again is dealing with the shadow work. So, and that one is at ethereal.com. So it's easy to
Nice.
find. There's lots of different ones. But again, you could search Etsy for individual artists. I know Ethereal and I believe Danielle's are both on Etsy as well. I know Shadowwork is, I believe, just straight on her site. But you can also often, if you don't have the ability and need something that's a little bit less expensive or only have access to like Amazon or a big box dealer, you can also search those websites for shadow work decks and you're going to find something too. It's all over the place. But again, finding a good deck that does have that focus on shadow work is really exciting because it, not that you can't do it with a regular
Yeah.
deck.
Well, and I was going to bring something up about
Mm-hmm.
that. A lot of people, I don't always go into learning a deck by memorizing all of its definitions.
Mm-hmm.
um and especially like a lot of people will have like their own expression for a reversal,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times I will also just read reversals as the energy of that card, but it's in your shadow, or
Mm-hmm.
it's there's a shadow aspect of it that you're not seeing, or the energy of that card, the lesson of that card is being blocked.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you are just, not a shadow work specific deck, but you
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of reversals coming up, that could also be pointing towards some shadow work that you could be doing.
Right. And the other one, that deck that just popped into my head, it's the one you have, is the under the bed.
Yeah, I love that one. Yes,
Right? It's
the little
little
monsters.
monsters under the
And it's
bed
like
deck.
it
It's
is
not.
shadowy, but it's so sweet at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. And yeah, you can making friends with your shadow. And here's one of the most beautiful things that I have to say about shadows and shadow work,
Mm-hmm.
and why it are, these aspects of ourselves deserve to be loved and integrated into who we are, and the fullest and most unique and authentic expression of ourselves. There would be no shadows if you were not casting off this radiance, this
Mm-hmm.
light. You know, light creates shadow. There, that is the isness of it all.
Mm-hmm.
That's the balance of the universe. That there is light and shadow. I love the moon because there is the shadow that goes across the moon, and the sun's light, changes as the moon faces. But the moon itself, she has a whole side that she doesn't show us.
Mm-hmm.
That's that her face is always facing. I found that so fascinating that, our earth turns, but the moon orbits us and shows us the same face, the exact same face, no
Mm-hmm.
matter where she is. So there's always a dark side of the moon.
Right.
She always has that presence of shadow. That's why you have the moon and the high priestess in the major arcana, um in contrast to the sun and the magician.
Mm-hmm.
So shadow is such an important balancing act, and
Mm-hmm.
it exists because we are radiant, lightful beings who are
Right.
awakening and enlightening. Aren't there yet, working on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not calling it good yet, but like, we try to do these things, but in doing all this brightness, we have to give work to, all of the stuff that happens in the underworld, on the
Mm-hmm.
underground, and on the other side of the veil, on the other side of our awareness, into
And
the abyss.
we need it to rest.
Ah,
If you think about it and everything else, if you're constantly in the light and you're constantly dealing with the idea of daylight, we need that opposite cycle, like you said, to rest, relax, or rest and recuperate and heal.
hmm,
That,
which
and
is
that
why,
comes from the darkness. It comes from that
yeah,
shadow aspect of being able to rest, sleep,
yes,
to the natural rhythm of the sleep cycle and the natural rhythm of healing cycle is
yeah,
healing requires pain, which could be on considered on that shadowy aspect. You have to work through it to heal. And you have to rest and
be
let your
able to slow
body do that to
down.
slow down to
Yeah.
do it.
Anybody who's recovered from a surgery or two would know exactly
Mm-hmm.
what that means. Yeah. And that brings me to one thing that I wanted to mention.
Mm-hmm.
If you are engaging in shadow work,
Yes.
I highly recommend that you have a support system, you have a
Mm-hmm.
support network, you have a therapist or a spiritual group, or some accountability buddy,
Mm-hmm.
um, someone that you can check in with, maybe someone that can go along and do their own shadow work, but like you can, compare notes, or not
Mm-hmm.
compare, but like share notes and just like
Mm-hmm.
keep yourselves accountable. But like, have a support network.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody deserves a support network.
Right, because sometimes you're going to hit a point where you realize, and that shadow work's going to be at that point where it's most painful and it's more where you're hurting, and you need a healer. You need someone to hold space for you. You need someone to touch you and or tell you that it's going to be okay. And that can be, like you
Or that
said,
you're not alone, that
right, that you're
that
not alone.
that other people have had similar experiences, that you're not bad or wrong, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you'll need some validation, you'll need some love,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Don't get lost in the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
You got to come back out of it.
Right, and
Yeah.
that's that reminder of if you are doing shadow work,
Yes.
you need to also be doing self-care,
Yes.
because
Da,
that
da, 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 da.
it's that balance thing, right?
Yep.
So self-care, we've talked about it in the idea of like we're stressed out, we need to do the things, so
Yeah.
self-care to bring yourself down. But shadow work can also stress you out. So
Yeah.
use that self-care to remember
So
how to love yourself in this
yeah.
aspect of
Yeah.
of yourself that you're
So
working through.
since I had like this imaginary person who's not experienced, and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted you to tell them how to start with shadow
Mm-hmm.
work, what would be like, if you did this
Mm-hmm.
shadow work, what self-care do you recommend, that like just to
Again,
balance it
it
out?
works for every different kind of person. Is going to have a different way to do it. I tend
Yes.
to be elementalist, so I think of it as you can deal with it in the ways of the
Mm,
four elements, right? You can create a gratitude list. You can write it out in air and words, right?
mm,
You can
mm-hmm.
gratitude, write it out in air. You can look at your growth and see the path you have taken, which kind of follows that earth pattern. Sit that and really sit back, take your emotions out of it, which is an earth thing to do. Stick your feet in
Mm-hmm.
the grass, put your feet in the ground, and
Mm-hmm.
really look at how far you've come in each aspect of it.
And get into the real world. Like
Exactly.
get
And
out of
pull
your
it, yeah,
head.
get out of your head, get into the real world, get grounded out. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
shower it off. Take, if your water element, get in that shower, let that water and just pour down over you, and just imagine all the stuff, all the hardness that you're working at, and just let it go down the drain with it. Shower it out, let it just release and go down the drain back into the earth to be recycled and reused. um Burn it.
Yes.
I said my fiery thing, once you write it out, burn it, scream it out, have a good cry, all those kinds
Yeah.
of things. Just
Bury it.
let it explode out of you. Burn it out.
Make a playlist and sing about it. Go
Exactly.
for a drive and
Go
sing
for a
very loud.
run, go for a drive,
Yeah.
go watch a sunset. And as the
Mm.
sun sets, let the emotions and the information and all that shadow work aspect of yourself, let that set with the sun. Imagine sending it all into the into the burning fire of the sun, and
Mm.
let it just set and be washed anew, and then the next day. So there's
Yeah.
so many different ways that you can talk about that for self-care in a way that works best for you. So
Beautiful.
that's my thought. How would you do it?
I think you just covered it all. Yeah. I mean, I am a water sign. I will find the right time and place to cry about it.
Hmm.
And sometimes if I just need a good cry, I'll put on a sad playlist or something that I know is going to remind me of my dad and make me cry,
Hmm.
or my friend Raven Moon who passed away and make me cry. So yeah, I'm definitely a cry about it. I love burning. I don't write in journals a lot because
Hmm.
I don't want to go read my words. Now, with that said, I write on my phone all the time. I have
Hmm.
poems, I have journal, and I have stuff. I have all kinds of stuff. But like for some reason, and this is just my weird brain, but thinking like I'm leaving these handwritten journals behind for people to read, I don't love that idea, but I do really love writing it all out and then burning that
Yes.
paper,
Yes.
ritualistically burning it. That is
Yes.
such a major release for me. It's
Hmm.
probably the Sagittarius rising.
Hmm.
Do love me
Hmm.
some fire. Yeah, so
Yes.
that's probably. And yes, I think it's very important that we can do both, that we can do
Hmm.
the shadow work and we can do the self-care, and let that be one of the cycles and patterns
Hmm.
that you engage in routinely. So I mean, do you feel like we've scratched the
I
surface
think we've
well?
scratched. I
Yes.
think we've scratched, and hopefully we have created an itch in you that you will scratch your own
Oh,
surface of
this is
dealing with
getting a
your own
little
kinds of shadow work.
weird.
I know. I'm a cat. I scratch. I try to find a way to bring this all around some way to something else. Like whether it
I
worked or
love you.
not, we'll leave it up to you to comment in the comments whether my metaphor worked or if I am just scratching up the wrong tree.
Yeah. Man, you just keep going.
With that said, like you said, is there
Yeah.
anything else we're missing?
No, I think we've covered it all. I love you.
I love you.
So I'm gonna
So,
say
mhm,
thank you for listening to the Queer Witch Project. And if you like what you heard and want to give us one of those, thummy up thingies, or tell us what your experience of shadow work is, or maybe how you want to get started, or what you've learned from this, go ahead and give us a comment. We love to hear from you.
please. And if there's a topic you want to know more about or an episode topic you want to suggest, please contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle @queerwitchproject. We upload every other week. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Love being yourself rebelliously. And yes, I did change that just for this episode.
Mwah.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, cool.
Do
I'll make
you,
sure I don't make noise.
yes,
Do
do you have your notes up?
No, not at all. Why do you know me so well? I do. I just had to unlock my phone. But the script is in my head, right? Right?
Totally, yeah.
And I hear myself doing it all the time. 100% comes to mind for me, which now it's going to pop out of my mind because I was going to bring it up.